Hello and good evening. My name is Meg Munch, and I will serve as your event and tech lead for tonight's program. Attendees will not have microphone or video capabilities, but Dean Reed Kroloff will be answering questions at the end of our evening, so you are encouraged to utilize the chat. Please note your viewing experience may be affected by your internet connection. And if you are having streaming issues, please take all other devices off Wi-Fi and reload Zoom. I am thrilled to share we had over 400 people register from 20 different countries for tonight's celebration. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Barbie Donnelly. She is a fifth generation Chicagoan with a dedicated and continuing interest in architecture, historic preservation, and horticulture. She has been on the Mies Society board since 2005, having served twice as chair. Barbara describes the IIT campus as inspiring and beautiful, and even during the pandemic, gives us a place to walk, admire, and reflect. Please welcome Barbie Donnelly.
Thank you, Meg. Welcome, everyone. It gives me so much pleasure to introduce tonight's lecture on Mies and Lilly Reich's Tugendhat House. It is one of Mies's most iconic houses, which tells the story of such a turbulent time in early 20th century history. My name is Barbie Donnelly, and I have been a member of the board of the Mies Society for 15 years and chair on 2 different occasions. One time was during the restoration of Carr Chapel, Mies's only religious building, and now a non-denominational place for all students at IIT. The Mies Society and the College of Architecture at IIT have recently formed a partnership to further the preservation of Mies's campus. Reed Kroloff, the dean of the college, has encouraged this collaboration, which will be a tremendous asset going forward. The Tugendhat House has a special meaning for me because my husband Tom and I went on a Mies Society trip in 2017 to visit the house and Mies's work in the Berlin area. Tugendhat House, which had recently opened for visitors, looks so pristine and fresh and made an indelible impression on all of us. This photo is of our group after a wonderful tour by Yvetna. And now I am thrilled that we can hear about the house and in particular, the collaborative work of Lilly Reich. Thank you so much for being with us today. And now I would like to introduce Cynthia Varnes Olson, director of the Mies Society and an alumna of the college.
Thank you, Barbie, for your thoughts and for all of your years of dedication to the Mies Society. It is a great honor and pleasure to be here virtually tonight with all of you for this evening's program. I'd like to thank the Mies van der Rohe Society, our board chair, Stephen Weiss, Ed Pollack, our vice chair, Zurich Esposito, our program chair, and board members, past and present, for their support and commitment. To Elaine and Kevin Harrington, our historians on call, and to my husband, Keith Olson Sr., who brings the richness of the legacy of IIT's architectural education to my attention constantly. A quick personal thank you to 2 alumnas, my mom, May Chiquinas Panopoulos, and Alice Orphanis Copen, IIT 1952 and 53, who encouraged me to study at IIT. To our co-sponsor, the College of Architecture, and Dean Reed Kroloff. It is together with Reed's guidance that the Mies Society and college thrive and represent the union between education, buildings, and culture. Our partners, whose names you see here, support, promote, and inspire us. To IIT's Advancement Department for being the backbone of the Mies Society, in particular, Dia, Meg, Jason, and Ernie Eiseminger, our VP. To our patrons tonight, Margaret and David Hensler, who have brought so much to this program this evening. The Mies Society is an IIT initiative whose aim is to preserve Mies van der Rohe's legacy, his philosophy, campus, buildings, and pedagogy. Thanks to our membership, donations, and volunteerism, the Mies Society has helped to preserve and maintain Crown Hall, Wishnick Hall, and Carr Chapel, among other projects at IIT. We are so fortunate to have the support of our President Alan Cram, Provost Kilpatrick, and the Board of Trustees who greatly value the campus and the buildings that make IIT an educational research laboratory in the heart of Chicago. In 1928, in Brno, Czechoslovakia, Mies van der Rohe developed his formalized style. With collaborative efforts of Lilly Reich, also an architect, they provided the Tugendhat family with a livable, modern house completed in 1930. When the Tugendhat family fled from the Nazis, the house was confiscated by a procession of authorities. The building suffered after years of misguided and neglectful use. More recently, the Tugendhat House of the Czech Republic has undergone an amazing conservation and restoration, becoming accessible and an inspiration to all. The house was designated a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 2001. Tonight, we focus on the collaborative efforts of Lilly Reich and Mies van der Rohe. And as part of the Tugendhat House story, it is appropriate that we encourage this discussion with a distinguished panel of authorities. With the help of colleagues Michelangelo Sabatino, director of the PhD program, and Reed Kroloff, the Dean of the College of Architecture at IIT, we will intersperse questions with very short presentations. First, we'll get a quick overview of the house, and thanks to Iveta Cherna of the Villa Tugendhat, we have a beautiful film to show you. But first, I'd like to introduce Iveta, who'd like to just greet you all. Iveta?
Hello. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased and very excited to be with you this evening. I have to mention that last year, Villa Tugendhat celebrated its 19th anniversary, for which we've prepared a number of events. So Villa is really old lady. But unfortunately, some of them took place in an empty space of the house, closed because of the pandemic, but other ones had to be postponed for this year. So you will find some exact description on our website. And if you will have any reaction, any question, please, we are open to you. So have a nice view to the film, which is part of this collection of special events for 90th anniversary.
Thank you, Iveta. Thank you so very much. And now we'll see a short film to give us a view of the house.
Dobrý den, vítám vás ve Villa Tugendhat, která je neuvěřitelným skvostem architektury.
Já vás vítám ve Villa Tugendhat. Začneme naší prohlídku a já vám na úvod řeknu něco o historii této stavby a
Nyní budeme pomaličku sestupovat po hlavním schodišti. Prosím opatrně, může to pod námi maličku klouzat.
je, musí tedy z té zimní zahrady ty už nepočítají až ten dílny, to zhruba řádově 300, tak celkem blízko, trošku se to přecenili, je to 241 metrů čtverečních. To už je docela slušné. Tady, jak jsem říkal, nejsou téměř žádné stěny. V tom prostoru uvnitř tak pouze ten onyx a eben.
Thank you, Iveta, for sharing this beautiful piece with us. Now from the University of Buffalo, we have colleague Elizabeth Otto, Associate Professor of Art History and Visual Studies from the College of Arts and Sciences. She is an art and cultural historian whose research centers on early 20th century visual and media culture with a focus on Europe. Libby has also published extensively on the Bauhaus, widely considered 20th century Europe's most influential art institution. Please welcome our colleague and friend, Elizabeth Otto.
Hi, thank you for this. I'm just going to share my screen with you now. So just give me 1 second to do that. All right, hopefully you can see that. What a wonderful film. I saw the chat blowing up a little bit, and I have to say, I wish we were all together there instead of in cyberspace, but here we are. So just in a few minutes, I'm going to speak about women at the Bauhaus to give a bit of context for Lilly Reich's work, because she is, compared to Mies, obviously by far the much lesser known partner. What I'm speaking about comes largely from a number of publications that I had come out in 2019, and I definitely want to point out that these were collaborative. Bauhaus Bodies is a collection of essays, and in the center, Bauhaus Women, we have an essay on Lilly Reich. In that, that's a book that I co-authored with Patrick Rossler in Germany, where we talk about 45 women of the Bauhaus that we think everyone should know. And on the right, I was part of a team that curated a Bauhaus exhibition for the centenary of the opening of the school in 2019 that featured 4 Bauhaus women, which was kind of groundbreaking because a lot of people don't even know there were very many women at the Bauhaus at all. In fact, there were Bauhaus women made up over a third of the students and participants at the school. We call them Bauhäusler, anyone, and they did this at the time, anyone who taught or was a part of the school counted as that. So the black bars, you can see those are numbers of women in different divisions at the school. By far the vast majority were in weaving, but they were in every single program throughout the school during its time. So that's important to remember. And this is just, I'm speaking, a lot of what I'm drawing is from my single authored book, Haunted Bauhaus, which also came out in 2019. It was a busy year. So what I'll talk about are a couple examples of Bauhaus women, and I'll end speaking specifically about Lilly Reich, just to give you again a brief overview. So here we see some typical examples of Bauhaus architecture, interior design, and objects. The Bauhaus School still stands in Dessau, and you can visit it and you can stay overnight if you want to really geek out. It's worth it. It's very inexpensive. And at the lower left is an object that probably many people would recognize as a Bauhaus designed object because it relies on primary forms and very sleek design. But it's by Marianne Brandt, who some may know, but many may not. But interestingly, this is the object, one such teapot. There were a handful of them manufactured. One holds the record for the highest price ever paid at auction for a Bauhaus object. So it should be better known, I think, than it is. Brandt was also, she was a metal designer. She led the metal workshop when Laszlo Moholy-Nagy left the Bauhaus in 1928. She was also a photographer and completed photomontages. Another name that may not be familiar to you is Reich Suppot. Like many women at the Bauhaus, she changed her name over time. So she came to the school named Erna Niemeyer, but spent the largest portion of her adult life with taking her nickname Reich as her first name, and Suppot, which was her second husband, Philip Suppot's last name. And I show you this image because it's one she drew to accompany an article she did in Die Form, the prominent design journal produced in Germany in 1930, and it's for a transformation dress. And what I would assert is that the interest in modularity and adaptability that was current in a lot of design at the time took particular form in women's work of the time. So here we see a dress called the transformation dress. where one single sheath could be transformed into a few looks for work. And you know, if you need to go right out to the opera or the cinema and want to be extra fancy, you just can have a long skirt in your bag that you attach and off you go without needing to stop at home. Reich herself, like many Bauhaus members, worked in multiple media. So she trained as a weaver at the Bauhaus. She ended up being a fashion designer, filmmaker, and photographer. Another Bauhaus member who I think is really important is Friedel Dicker. She's also known as Friedel Dicker Brandeis once she married. And here's just a transformable toy that she made with her collaborator, Franz Singer. She was Austrian, and they had a design studio where they made interior designs that often transform from one thing to another. So here's a guest house in the day view above and the night view below, where you can roll out the bed and have space to sleep. She became politicized once the Nazis came to power in Germany. She was in Austria and became a member of the Communist Party. It was actually relatively rare for women to take a political affiliation. And here's one of her protest photo montages that she made at the time. And she's important because she ended up in Auschwitz teaching Bauhaus members. She perished in Auschwitz, but she was in Theresienstadt and she taught Bauhaus methods to children there. Okay, I just want to make sure that I speak about Lilly Reich, who is kind of the lesser known pair to Mies van der Rohe. She was a designer in her own right who opened her own studio in Berlin in 1911. And she had commissions. She became the first member of the board of directors of the Werkbund, who was a woman in 1920. In the late 20s, she met Mies and they began collaborating on many of the greatest hits that we know. Haus Tugendhat that we just saw, the Barcelona Pavilion, and she also did work on her own. So these are two designs of a cooking cupboard for an apartment for a single person. Reports are that single people who actually used this found it rather small and cramped, but the idea was, you know, for somebody to have a kitchen of their own. She wrote on fashion and included her own designs here for undergarments in them, and was very active in exhibition design. This is another project she did with Mies van der Rohe. So I'll just conclude here by showing you the Barcelona chair, which is still being manufactured, to say that I think once we put women back into the story of the Bauhaus, into looking at Mies van der Rohe's work, and in general in life, we have a much more interesting, not only accurate history, but a richer one. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Libby, thank you so very much. This was wonderful information, and I'm so sure that we'll want to invite you to campus as soon as we're open again. I'd now like to introduce Dirk Lohan. Dirk received part of his training in his native Germany, but spent a defining year at IIT in 1958 to 59 under the tutelage of his grandfather. As an architect, Dirk worked for his grandfather's architectural firm, Mies van der Rohe, for several years, gaining valuable experience. Dirk became a principal and his name was reflected in the successor firm. Over the years, he has formed new entities on his own and his work has always been high profile and exemplary. Dirk is a fellow of the AIA and IIT trustee emeritus, a College of Architecture and Mies Society board member. Please welcome Mies's grandson, Dirk Lohan.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here and speak about the Tugendhat House, Mies and Lilly Reich. And I just want to make it clear that although I'm part of Mies's family, I never met Lilly Reich. She preceded my young years. But I was aware of the Tugendhat House quite early on, long before I decided to become an architect, because my mother, Mies's daughter, had some black and white photographs of the Tugendhat House which were taken after it was finished. They're very well known, and I'm sure we'll sooner or later today even see one or two of the pictures. There's that famous picture of the living room with the Tugendhat chair and the Barcelona chair and the onyx wall and the Lembrook sculpture. That was a black and white picture that was hanging in my room as a growing up teenager. And I was always fascinated with it because we didn't have anything like that when I grew up and after World War II Europe. I took several trips over the years to the Czech Republic, and I have visited the Tugendhat House several times, but most memorable is the trip in 1969 when the Prague Spring happened, and the Eastern European, well, the Czech Republic was trying to get rid of the Soviet Union, and there was a period of liberal effort and upbeat feelings. And there was an architect in Brno, František Kalivoda, who wanted to restore the house then and there. And he invited Mies, who was still alive, to come, and he invited Grete Tugendhat and Daniela Tugendhat as well, and they came to Brno, but Mies couldn't come. This was the year of his death. He was quite frail and couldn't travel, but he asked me to go there and send me to Brno, which was a very memorable trip. Mr. Kalivoda is in the picture on the far right, standing. I think memorable. I'm sitting in the front here, and next to me is Grete Tugendhat and Daniela, who is not with us today, but she's probably listening and viewing this presentation as well. I remember that Grete Tugendhat gave a talk about the genesis of the Tugendhat House and why they hired and how they met Mies van der Rohe, etc. She did that in the Czech language, which of course I didn't understand, but I have since studied it and read it. Now, I should say that Lilly Reich's participation is quite important in the Tugendhat House and in the Barcelona Pavilion. She was originally a designer, a clothing designer, a decoration designer. She studied under Josef Hoffmann at the Wiener Werkstätte in Vienna as a younger woman. And she joined the Werkbund, which was an organization of German industry and crafts to promote German products. And Mies got involved in the Werkbund as well. One of the exhibits that Lilly Reich organized long before she knew Mies was this particular one of a wood exhibit. I don't know at which exhibit this is, but I think to me, it's always very memorable. She actually put real logs cut in two to show the quality of the wood and how you work with wood. She came from a well-to-do Berlin industrial family, had a good education, was quite articulate, and very interested in modern ideas. And the Wiener Werkstätten was sort of a precursor to the Bauhaus. And as we already heard, she later joined, when Mies was the director of the Bauhaus, for really only a very short period of time in the early 30s, the Bauhaus. But then when they met in 1925, I think, and began to collaborate. Although I want to make it clear, although nobody knows exactly the particular circumstances, but They lived separately all the time in Berlin. They never moved together. They didn't live together. Mies had his studio in his apartment building, and she had her own studio as well. But I know that from what he told me from time to time, and what my mother mentioned, because she knew her, of course, that she was very opinionated, had a very good taste and aesthetic sense. And apparently, Mies appreciated that very much and sought out her opinion quite often, while he very often did not want to hear the opinions of his younger collaborators in the studio. So she particularly was involved in the furniture design at the Tugendhat house. There are by the way, I mentioned that the photograph that I lived with, so to say, and that I knew very well, was black and white. That was before there was color photography. The same is true of the Barcelona pavilion. When we recreated the Barcelona pavilion, I was involved with that with the Spanish architects and the Museum of Modern Art. It was a real eye-opener to see the color of the marble walls and the onyx. And this same thing applies to the Tugendhat house. As you can see here, Lilly Reich persuaded Mies or influenced him to agree to use these bright colors on top of as upholstery to the furniture. Her particular strength and knowledge, and she had studied that, was weaving, and she was an expert at fabrics. And not only did she have a hand or a decisive hand in the coloration of some things that they did together, but I also want to point out that some of the exhibits they did together, particularly in Berlin and Frankfurt, were large furniture exhibits, and they were often arranged with drapes and curtains separating spaces from one another. And it's very interesting that in the Tugendhat house, when, I don't know if there's a picture that we can see, but there are all kinds of curtain tracks going not only along the window, but through the spaces where the spaces could be divided by pulling the drapes to create some privacy, or you could sit and study something separate from the rest of the open space. So this was a way of dividing the space, the open flowing space of the house. I don't want to go on too long, but when the Nazis came to power, the two of them were still partners, and of course the work dried up and the commissions reduced, and they primarily lived or had income. Mies had income from his furniture patents during the 1930s, the middle 30s. And then, of course, he had some contacts via Philip Johnson and the Museum of Modern Art with American people. And there was a growing pressure on him, or shall we say, persuasion on him to consider moving to America. And then in 1939, he decided to go to Chicago and accept the position at IIT. At that time, it was called Armour Institute of Technology. Interesting is that in 1939, in the early fall or late summer, Lilly Reich visited Mies in Chicago. And she was for several weeks in Chicago, and Mies had been asked by IIT to do a master plan for the campus, for the enlarged and growing campus. And they, together with Hilbersheimer and maybe Peter Hans, I don't remember now, but two other assistants who were former Bauhausler, American students that were Mies's assistants because he didn't speak fluent English or not good enough English to teach. They went together as a group to spend a week in Wisconsin at a resort on a little lake. And they sat around the table there every day with plans of IIT and talked German. They were all Germans. And this was a big German discussion. And interestingly enough, and I find that very humorous and very funny, that one of the waiters there observed that and made some notes and passed it on to the FBI. And the FBI never followed up, but obviously there was a suspicion on the part of the waiter that they were doing some illegal things in America, speaking all this German with plans and buildings, etc. This was later verified by Freedom of Information Act. The FBI had a portfolio on this particular issue. So Lilly Reich went back to Berlin during the war, and eventually her house, her building was bombed, and she moved outside Berlin and survived sparingly, but still doing designs, apartment renovations after 1945, a few of those, and she died in 1947, tragically, I think. And I'm very glad to learn and to hear that so many people now recognize her as the creative designer that she was.
Dirk, thank you for teaching us and for sharing your family's rich history. It is now my pleasure to introduce Ana Ramos for a brief hello from the Fundació Mies van der Rohe in Barcelona. Ana, would you like to greet?
Hi, thank you, Cynthia. On behalf of all the team from Fundació Mies van der Rohe in Barcelona, it is for me an honor and a pleasure to be with you tonight. I also thank your interest in the Lilly Reich grant and the opportunity to share it with such distinguished audience tonight. Thank you.
Thank you again, Ana, for being with us. The Fundació Mies van der Rohe in Barcelona presented the second Lilly Reich grant for equality in architecture recently and awarded it to the research proposal On Set with Lilly Reich by Valencian architects Laura Lizondo Sevilla and Deborah Domingo Calubig and Evelina Prat Garcia. About our guest scholars, Laura received her master's in architecture in 2003 and PhD in 2012. Deborah received her MArch in 1997 and PhD in 2005. They are both professors of architecture at the Polytechnic University of Valencia, Spain. Their dean, Ivan Cabrera, is our guest tonight as well, as is our good friend and colleague, Zaida Requeño Garcia, a professor, but at the University of A Coruña. It was Zaida who introduced us. So I'd like to welcome you all. And before our Laura and Deborah give a short presentation, Ivan Cabrera would like to say good evening to us.
Good American evening, European night to everybody. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank the organization for this kind invitation to the event and for this chance to intervene. Most of you must be familiar with the fact that Spanish architects have a meaningful background in architectural engineering and technology, meaning building and conditioning techniques and structural analysis and design. Maybe this is one of the reasons for all of us who were educated in the higher technical school of architecture of the Polytechnic University of Valencia, having a meaningful background in Mies van der Rohe's life and works. Deborah Domingo, Laura Lizondo, and Taverina Prats studied at our institution in Valencia. Later on, Deborah and Laura became tenured and successful professors at our school as well. We are very proud about their academic, research, and professional careers, which now have been recognized with the awarding of the second Lilly Reich Scholarship. We are sure that their work will contribute to expanding our knowledge on all what this amazing figure meant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you so much for being with us. And now we welcome our two scholars who are with us tonight, Laura Lizonda Sevilla and Deborah Domingo Salubig.
Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, we would like to thank Cynthia Barnes, Director of the Mies van der Rohe Society, for the opportunity to take part in this event. Deborah Domingo and I will go on to explain the research project and the film project we are carrying out as a result of the winning the second edition of the Lilly Reich Grant for Equality in Architecture, called by the Mies van der Rohe Foundation. However, before doing so, we thought it would be appropriate to talk briefly about the main character of this event, Lilly Reich, a figure who was unknown until quite recently. Next, please. So who was Lilly Reich and what do we know about her? The truth is that there are only 2 monographs that explicitly deal with her career. The one written by Sonia Gunther in 1988 and the one produced by Matilda McQuay in 1996 to mark the first exhibition that paid tribute to Lilly Reich, held at the MoMA in New York, where her documentary archive is also kept. Lilly Reich was born in 1885 into a well-to-do German family, and she was brought up in an unconventional way for a woman of that time. In 1908, she began her training with Joseph Hoffman in the Viennese workshops, where she was introduced to the knowledge of novel materials and design based on abstract language. After that, she studied with Else Oberlehrmann at the Higher Technical School for Decorative Arts, co-founded by the Deutsche Werkbund, where she was introduced to a more sophisticated sphere of the fashion world and to the furniture and estate design. This scenario was also a springboard for her inclusion in the Werkbund at the 1912. Next, please. From then on, Lilly Reich embarked on an important professional career in which, starting with fashion, window dressing, and industrial design, she progressively incorporated ephemeral architectures on an increasingly larger scale. We don't have time now, but it could be very interesting to explore Lilly Reich's solo career, the institutions to which she belonged, the people with whom she collaborated, and the aspects that made her a pioneering designer in the early 1920s. Next, please. Next slide, please. In 1926, at the height of her career, she began a period of collaboration with Mies van der Rohe, and for a decade, they designed more than 80 exhibition spaces and a large number of residential interiors, including the Tugendhat House, and they also shared classrooms at the Bauhaus of Dessau and Berlin. The power they exercised over each other, Mies over Reich or Reich over Mies, was not unidirectional. Much has been speculated about this issue, but research indicates that their collaboration was a set of experiences and discoveries for both, at different levels, of course. Christian Lange provides a wonderful metaphor that helps to understand the richness of this congenial partnership. Curtains were an indispensable element of the spatial planning in all the interiors by Mies and Reich. As can be seen in the Tugendhat House, on the one hand, this creative motif expressed the way Mies strove to achieve fluid, interactive surfaces. And on the other hand, it reflected Reich's renowned talent for color and material. it's questionable if one of them would have come to this kind of extraordinary result without the assistance of the other. Unfortunately, what they learned and experienced together did not have the same impact on their professional careers, nor on architectural criticism. There are many reasons for this, including the fact that she was a woman in a complex social and political period. This is precisely why we have considered it necessary to analyze the role that critics have attributed to Lilly Reich and compare it with her architectural legacy. This is the reason behind the research and film project that Deborah Domingo is going to explain. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Well, the second Lilly Reich grant for equality in architecture was launched by the Mies van der Rohe Foundation in Barcelona last June 2020. And this grant aims to support the study, dissemination, and visualization of contributions to architecture that had been relegated or forgotten, made by professionals who have suffered discrimination because of their personal conditions. In this case, and because the results of the first edition of the grant highlighted the need to continue studying and exploring Lilly Reich's character, the second edition of the open call was aimed at focusing on Reich's words. We had all the available research information on Reich's professional work before and after meeting Mies van der Rohe. But what we did is to go and examine the best known books on the history of architecture. As Laura has just mentioned, some recent works do focus on Lilly Reich, but they are specialized publications, usually aimed at a limited audience. Yet the authors of the basic books one reads when studying architecture have or omitted or made Lilly Reich invisible in one way or another. And this said, she is present in many professional journals that were published in the 1920s and 30s. So as a result, the contrast became evident between her presence in the modern professional press and her absence in later literature, which are actually the sources that build the history of architecture. And Lilly Reich had a background in the so-called minor arts and an individually established professional career. Her disciplinary circles expanded to the field of architecture when she began to collaborate with Mies van der Rohe. But however, far from her access to a greater art being visible, her participation was always relegated to the background. And so the idea for this project came about. Next, please. On set with Lilly Reich opts for the production and filming of a documentary as a means of disseminating this objective. It is a short film project that combines original documental sources with newly created visual materials and which intends to reflect the limitation of recognition in the professional field to this woman, like so many others, contrasting what she contributed, what was done, with the information that was provided about her, what was narrated. And all this done by means of a story of two timelines, parallel timelines, one that refers to her professional output and another that refers to her historical representation, in this way aspiring to identify the turning points for recovering the figure of Lilly Reich under conditions of equality. The composition of the results will help to visualize the specific contribution that Lilly Reich made to the field of architecture, from her professional experience in the field of design, ephemeral architecture, and exhibition space, but also it will emphasize the distorted way that Lilly Reich was represented due to the assumption of gender roles in the social and cultural context, not only of that moment, but also through the following decades of the 20th century. In developing this proposal, we have planned two stages of work, a research project and a film project. And this is where the third member of the team comes into play, our colleague, Avelina Pratt, who trained as an architect and has professional experience as a filmmaker. We believe that the documentary format will allow us to reach a large audience. It will be a short film lasting around 20 minutes, although we are looking for complementary funding in order to extend it to a length of 30 minutes, more suitable for TV broadcasting. The idea will be to combine different types of visual content, such as archive materials, interviews, and also photo montages, and even small animations. So the premiere of the documentary is planned for March 8th, 2022, International Women's Day. And so in around a year's time, we will be about to see this proposal take shape. We are very grateful to the Mies van der Rohe Foundation for trusting in us. And we are also very excited and overflowing with energy to get to work on this project. Thank you.
Thank you both, and congratulations. We can't wait to see more of your work. I'd now like to have some comments from our IIT College of Architecture professors. First, Jung-Sung Kim, who has his bachelor's and his master's from IIT. Professor Kim has worked in the office of Mies van der Rohe during the 60s and taught architectural studio design for IIT for a dozen years until he formed SAC International in Seoul. Professor Kim is a fellow of the AIA and the Korean Institute of Architects. He's a board member of the Mies Society, and he continues to mentor us at the College of Architecture. His photography of European monuments brought him to the Tugendhat House years ago. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kim.
Hello, everyone. I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to photograph the restored Tugendhat House just before the public opening in 2012. I think I was alerted by Ivo and Iveta at the Docomomo conference in Helsinki the year before. So I planned to arrive at the restored Tugendhat House just before the public opening. And here are sets of photographs that I took. And you will get some sense of what you have already seen in black and white. But then there are some, for example, this archival picture from the 1930, that is one. Move on, please. That's another. And that is soon after the restoration. Here, Meg, please stay here a few seconds. I want to make a point of Barcelona Pavilion, Tugendhat House, and 1931 Building Exhibition House as being out of the same concept. So Barcelona Pavilion, although it is not exactly for dwelling, I think it was scaled as a residence. And where the black glass table is placed against onyx, that probably represents the hearth, the fireplace of our house. Please, next. And the 1931 Berlin Building Exhibition House. Here, I believe Mies used a black ebony paneling to represent the center of the room. But here, the black ebony, Barcelona Pavilion's onyx, Tugendhat onyx wall, they all represent the conceptual center of a dwelling. Next. I go back to 1927 Werkbund exhibition where Mies van der Rohe and Lilly Reich produced glass room exhibit. And here we still see a bit conservative armchairs. Next. Yes, so I want to conclude my set of pictures with the archival picture, especially with the Lehmbruck torso. I think the one before did not have a sculpture, and I think how much that Lehmbruck torso adds to the sense of space. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kim. And I'd like to have Michelangelo Sabatino ask a couple of questions he has for you and for Dirk. Michelangelo?
Thank you, Cynthia. And of course, thank you, Young-Sung. We know you are both talented photographer and architect. So after first relying upon black and white photography of the Villa Tugendhat, how did you experience the revelation of color and richness when you first visited? Was it an emotional reaction? What kind of reaction did you have?
It was a rather pleasant surprise to see green on Barcelona chairs and the Barcelona Ottoman, and a very bright red on the chaise longue. I was not prepared to see that. Whereas by training, of course, we all know what onyx looks like, what Makassar ebony looks like. So those two major texture in the room, I was prepared. But then the Barcelona chairs in green upholstering and that bright red on chaise longue, that I must say, after listening to all the presentations, it must have been Lilly Reich who sort of proposed it, and the Mies probably gladly acceded to the idea.
Great, thank you.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely, Dirk.
It's interesting to note that the coloration of the furniture, that I agree with Kim that Lilly Reich brought these ideas to Mies, and Mies adopted them and accepted them. But I had a personal interesting experience in the mid-60s when I worked with my grandfather, and we worked on the new National Gallery in Berlin, which is, as you all know, one big open space, 250 feet by 250 feet, black painted steel, and glass walls surrounding it as an exhibition space. And Mies, we were beginning to think about how the first exhibit, which was planned to be a Mondrian painting exhibit. Mondrian's paintings are all relatively small, but very colorful. We talked about it, he and I, and he said, you know, why don't you do some studies for some curtains that are hanging free in the space, and not only just white or black, but red, blue, and green. And I almost fell over because at that time I hadn't heard him ever speak like that about bright colors. But we studied that, we made some suggestions, and at the Mondrian exhibit, there were such curtains dividing the space. And that is, shall we say, the lasting influence of Lilly Reich's aesthetic.
Thank you, Dirk, and thank you for sharing your memories and insights. So we've already touched upon this with Young Sung, but I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit more about spatial and material affinities between the Barcelona Pavilion and, say, the Tugendhat Villa.
Are you asking me or? Okay,
Dirk.
sorry.
I'm asking Dirk.
Oh,
okay.
Okay, Kim, you're welcome. Spatial and material relationships. Well, obviously between first of all, it is important to note that the Barcelona Pavilion and the Tugendhat House were both being designed and even built more or less at the same time. So obviously there were thoughts in the designer's head that influenced both of them. The Barcelona Pavilion uses onyx wall as a major feature, and so does the Tugendhat House. And the structure of both buildings is a steel structure, and the columns are expressed and freestanding in the space. And the spatial divisions of the flow of space from one to another is achieved and expressed by freestanding walls or even some curtains that ran on tracks. That is particularly true in the Tugendhat House. The other very interesting little anecdote that I'd like to maybe relate here is when Mies received a call, he told me this and laughing about it. He's from the German Foreign Ministry during the Weimar Republic in the late 20s. You know, we need to build a pavilion for the Bologna World's Fair. And Mies said, "What is a pavilion?" Mm-hmm. And the official, von Schnitzler was his name, didn't know what it was either, but he said, all the other nations have a pavilion. We need one too. And so what's so interesting about it to me is that the Barcelona Pavilion has become the quintessential expression of a pavilion. And the meaning of the word is exemplified by that building. What Mies did also, the German colors of the flag was, as they are today, black, red, and gold. And he had black carpet and red drapes and gold onyx, but not arranged in a flag. It was just very subtle, and you had to feel it rather than see it specifically.
Right.
I think that's
thank you.
Something unique.
Thank you all. I'd like to ask another professor. Reid Kroloff is a national leader in the fields of architecture, design, and urbanism. He's also the dean of our renowned IIT College of Architecture. And he's been referred to as the man with the list at architecture's party. Let me introduce Reid Kroloff. And Reid, I have a quick question for you to set the tone. As Dean of the College of Architecture, you embrace a rich legacy while having a determination to move the program forward at IIT. What are your thoughts about the relationship of architecture and interiors?
Well, thank you, Cynthia. It's a great question. And I want to just say welcome to everybody. And what an exciting evening. This is an extraordinary occasion. And it's a pleasure to be a part of it. I'm reminded when you asked me that question, my previous posting in academia before taking about 10 years off was as the director of Cranbrook Academy of Art, which was at the time a place in close conversation intellectually with the Bauhaus, if not actually with the Bauhaus. and a kind of a bridge between the modern movement and the arts and crafts. The man who ran it, Eliel Saarinen, once said that you can't be an architect unless the object that you're working on, while you're working on it, you think about the next smaller and the next larger scale at the same time. If you don't do all three of them, you'll fail. And to my mind, interiors is that next smaller scale, right? It's the thing that isn't the entire building, but it's the heart of it. And you can't separate the two as a design exercise. You can have different designers, as we're seeing with Lilly Reich, but what you can see from the work that we are viewing of hers is that she's thinking about the buildings spatially and materially in exactly that same way. She's thinking about the next smaller object, whether it's a chair or a desk or a room defined by a curtain or defined by panels of wood. And she's simply taking the design operation down one scale level. My guess is she's also thinking about it a scale level up. And I would like to think that a lot of the color work that she does is drawn from that as well, as looking out in the environment, seeing colors, abstracting them and bringing them down a couple of steps in scale. And so to my mind, they are all of an operation. You can look at them as distinct aspects, but they work much better as a unified and continuous whole.
Beautifully said, Reed. Thank you so very much. I'd like to also introduce Martin Felsen, who's a fellow of the AIA, director of Urban Lab, an architecture and urban design firm based in Chicago. He's also the director of the Masters of Architecture program at IIT. And to Martin, as the director of this program, could you say just a few words about the integration of interiors in the work of your studios? Welcome, Martin.
Oh, thank you very much, Cynthia. Great to be here. I think that interiors actually has never been more important to all of us, given that we've all been locked in our houses for the last year, moving toward a year and a half already at this point. And we've really understood the importance to our health, both mental health and physical health, not to mention our relationships, to survive this lockdown inside. And maybe the whole world has a different appreciation of interiors at this point. From an educational point of view, I think that interiors is critical because of the chance for architects to express themselves, especially their own taste through interiors. And that has a lot to do with what Dirk had mentioned before about the idea that I think really without taste, there's almost no economy to some degree. The industry and the economics behind difference of taste, especially through craft, through aesthetic difference, really drives so much of what we all do in the various ways that we do it. And to forget that, that connection, I think, really would be forgetting that that so much of the economy is based around the idea of how to express our interest in aesthetics. And lastly, what I've learned through the students at IIT in the master's degree is that the idea of the relationship between the inside and the outside is cultural. I think in Chicago, as an architect, the way I think about getting to the interior is by first concentrating on the exterior, and we go from the outside in. But in fact, so many cultures start with the interior as architects, as designers, and they move out from that. But you don't even begin a project until you think about what's happening from the perspective of planning and designing the interior space or spaces first, and then move on from there. So that's been an interesting lesson that I've learned as well from students from all over the world, as everybody knows, that find themselves at IIT.
Thank you so much, Martin. And we can't wait to see the work of your students at Open House this spring. I'd like to share with everyone a letter that I received a couple of years ago. Dear Cynthia, we have such warm memories of our meeting in the Tower conference room at IIT on May 25th, 2019, and our visit of the IIT buildings, the Farnsworth House, the visit of Dirk and Catherine Lohan's marvelous flat, and the dinner on May 28th, together with Keith Olson, Steve Weiss, and of course, Margaret and David Hensler. Let us have a conversation, Cynthia, about the family's perception of Lilly Reich's collaboration with Mies to the design of the Tugendhat House. With warmest regards, Ivo. Ivo Hammer is a conservator, restorer, art historian, PhD, studied in fine art, history, and philosophy. His extensive experience led him to many different forms of conservation, including becoming the chair of the International Expert Commission of the Tugendhat House recently. Tonight, Ivo will present his thoughts on Lilly Reich's contribution to the design of the Tugendhat House, including the furniture and interiors, and the importance of her collaboration with Mies. So it is a great honor to introduce tonight Ivo Hammer. Ivo? Ivo, I'm not sure, I think you're muted.
No.
Here we are.
Here we are. Do you understand me? Thank you very much, Cynthia, for your kind words. It's a pleasure for me to take part to this memorable event. Please, give my, thank you very much. From 1926 until Mies moved to Chicago in 1938, Lilly Reich had a professional and personal relationship with Mies, as Dirk referred to. In terms of their outward appearance, they had a relationship with separate apartments and separate offices that was unusual for the time. Next, please. Lilly Reich's life, next, please. As an exhibition and furniture designer, as the only female designer of her own tubular steel furniture collection, and the only female member of the board of the Werkbund, has been researched today. But to this day, many Mies biographers only refer to Lilly Reich as Mies's employee, as his co-worker, and only give her, quote, at most an advisory role, probably largely responsible for the choice of fabrics and color tones of upholstery, curtains, and carpets, as Wolf Tegethoff writes. She is called the woman at the side of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, as you can read on the current page of the Bauhaus Foundation in Dessau. However, since the research of the past 30 years, for example, of Deborah Dietsch, Sonja Günther, Matilda McQuaid, Christiane Lange, Laura Lizondo Sevilla, Carmen Espegel, and others, mostly female architectural historians, there is evidence that Lilly Reich was a congenial professional partner of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and co-author of many important projects. Building on this research, I would like to make a few comments on the authorship of the Tugendhat House, especially Lilly Reich's contribution. Next, please. In order to understand the design of the Tugendhat House, it is useful to outline the history of the collaboration between Lilly Reich and Mies van der Rohe since 1926. The first major joint work was the Werkbund exhibition, The Dwelling, in Stuttgart in 1927. Mies designed and managed the construction of the Weißenhof-Siedlung. Lilly Reich was responsible, at Mies's suggestion, for the organization and design of 8 exhibition areas, and also designed some of the home furnishings in Mies's apartment block of the Weißenhof-Siedlung. In the glass hall, set up on the initiative of Mies, we already find important elements of the aesthetics and materiality of the Tugendhathaus and of the Barcelona pavilion. Glass walls with different textures and colors, yellowish white linoleum floor, even a kind of winter garden. As a whole, this exhibition was an enormous, internationally recognized success and a brilliant start to the cooperation between Lilly Reich and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. The next, please. In the same year, in 1927, Lilly Reich and Mies van der Rohe designed the café Velvet and Silk as part of the Women's Fashion Exhibition in Berlin. The photo shows a continuous space divided by high curtains, walls made of silk, rain, and velvet. Individual areas are furnished with tables and chairs designed by Mies. Kenneth Frampton wrote of the curtain walls in 1985. The black, orange, and red velvets, as reflected in the image Laura showed, and the gold, silver, black, and lemon yellow silks no doubt reflect Lilly Reich's taste. Quote end. Next, please. Lilly Reich was artistic director of all 25 areas of the international exhibition in Barcelona in 1929, which were presented by Germany. Here too we find important elements of the aesthetics and materiality of the Tugendhathaus. The next, please. Mies was responsible for the design of the German pavilion, but at the same time, perhaps even a little earlier, Mies van der Rohe and Lilly Reich began designing the Tugendhathaus. As you know, the contract for the Barcelona pavilion was set in November 1928. According, the next please, to the research of Christiane Langes published in German in 2006, next please, Lilly Reich designed at least 13 pieces of furniture for the Tugendhathaus, which, with 2 exceptions, have been attributed to Mies van der Rohe to date. Christiane Lange studied the original plans using forensic methods and was able to secure the attribution to Lilly Reich, primarily due to the style of the writing on the plans. This not applies to Lilly Reich's well-known authorship for the bookshelf, this one, the bookshelf in Fritz Tugendhat's bedroom and the glass buffet or display cabinet in the living room. The authorship of Lilly Reich is also assured for 11 more pieces of furniture of Tugendhat. By the way, we must self-critically admit, unfortunately, in our publication on the Tugendhathaus, last published in 2020 in an expanded and revised edition in the furniture catalogue, Wolf Tegethoff has not included Christiane Lange's research concerning Lilly Reich. So Lilly Reich's authorship on the following 11 pieces of furniture designed for the Tugendhathaus has remained largely invisible to this day. Next, please. The dining room buffet made of Macassar ebony is a design of Lilly Reich. The chrome-plated steel tubes reflect the building principle of the house, at least aesthetically, even though they may not be technically necessary due to the thickness of the furniture body. Next, please. The bridge table and the sofa in the library, both also made of Makassar ebony, are designs of Lilly Reich. The upholstery of the sofa and the Bernau chairs are made of parchment, in this case, thin goat skin, as you may realize in this black and white photo from De Sandalo from 1931. Next, please. The yellowish white bench in front of the wall of the onyx marble and the desk of the library with the legs made of chromed tubular steel and the attachment for the writing utensils is a design of Lilly Reich. By the way, also the carpet woven by Alan Müller-Hellwig in Lübeck. You see in the black and white photograph. I omit the next, please go through the next images to save time. Next, please. Lilly Reich's display cabinet summarizes the design principles applied to the Tugendhat house, much like a coda in music. The 6 chrome-plated steel feet echo the framework structure of the house and are recessed to the inside and traversed by the base and shelf. They allow for very delicate curtain walls and sliding doors made of bluish anthracite opal glass that do not act as supporting elements. Viewed from the conservatory, one can see strong reflections in the black stained pierwood interior, even the same pierwood you find also in the dining room desk. And viewed from the entrance, dark transparency of the glass. The thickness of the furniture body walls appear thinner as a result of the elegant chrome-plated metal strip running along the top of the cabinet's front side. The exquisite matte off-white varnish is integrating the furniture walls into the color continuity of the interior design and enhances the impression of lightness and dematerialization. The quest of immateriality is realized by material means. Even if in further research it should be difficult and perhaps even impossible to determine the exact contributions of Lilly Reich and Mies van der Rohe in detail, one can say that 2 congenial personalities have worked together here, both of whom have brought their specific abilities to the joint work. Since 2001, the Tugendhat House is part of the World Heritage of Humanity. Its artistic authors are both Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Lilly Reich. I come to an end. Using the example of Tugendhat House and the collaboration between Lilly Reich and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, we saw that interior design cannot not separated from the design of space. We also saw the importance of materiality for the artistic appearance of the space. There's missing a, I just wanted to refer on the color, and at the bottom at the right, you see the original green of the Barcelona chair of the straps of the Ottoman. So the actual copies in the house are much too bright. The original color was much more decent. The next slide, please. Yeah, this is the display cabinet. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, with a view to a university like IIT, which trains architects, I would therefore like to make two proposals for consideration. Interior design as an independent training course and specialization that enables equal cooperation with other architects should be installed. And second, conservation restoration of architectural surface as a training course and specialization which enables cooperation with architects to have an integrated whole of the material preservation of the historical buildings of the modern movement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ivo, and for being here from Vienna, where it is very early in the morning. Thank you for all of that information. We're very lucky to have you. Now, in the interest of time, I'd like to briefly introduce June Finfer. June is a playwright. She studied photography and filmmaking at IIT's Institute of Design. Her husband was an architect and student of Mies, Paul Finfer. And tonight you'll see some excerpts from her film, from the Tugendhat House. She captured Daniela Tugendhat and others beautifully. So you're in for a treat in just a moment. I just want to ask June very briefly how this film came to be. June? June, you're muted.
Okay, hi. In 1999, Bob Babin, who was very active and a graduate architect at IIT, organized a tour called Beyond Mies, or maybe it was Mies and Beyond. And he invited my husband and me to come and document the tour on video. When I told a friend that we were going to be going to Barcelona and Berlin and Bilbao, he said, well, you're going to go to see the Tugendhat House, aren't you? And my husband said, is it still there? And I said, what is it? So we studied up, we looked at all of the pictures, and after our trip with Bob and a wonderful group of alumni, and we met up with students in Barcelona, we went on to Czechoslovakia at that time, and we had hired just to be allowed to film there for 2 hours. And I just brought my camera and I filmed it myself. And I learned that Daniela, the daughter of the family, was living in Vienna. And we made another trip to Vienna. We met Daniela and Ivo, had a wonderful day together, and I interviewed her. And they shared with me their wonderful story of Greta, her mother, and how the part that she had in the design of the house and in accepting Mies's ideas. So it was a great experience for me, and it later led to my writing plays about Mies and other things, but that Mies and Beyond trip was great, and I'm glad to share this segment of my film with you when I interviewed Daniela in Vienna.
Thank you, June. We're about to really enjoy this. So let's go ahead and take a look at your work.
One of the most influential works of 20th century architecture in Europe has been added to the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites. Although it is beloved of architects the world over, the Villa Tugendhat in the Czech Republic's second city of Brno is not well known to the general public. Designed in 1928, it is the finest surviving European masterpiece of the great modernist architect Mies van der Rohe, who later became famous for his towering Chicago skyscrapers.
You know, I remember when I once asked my mother, and I said, I can't imagine, even if I really like an architect, you know, that an architect plans everything, you know, to the least detail. And that, you know, somehow, didn't you ever feel somehow wasn't this difficult for you? And so she said, no, it wasn't, because, you know, it was so much just, you know, the way that we wanted to have it. The parents of my mother were a very rich family in Czechoslovakia. They had the villa on one side of the garden, and on the upper part of this garden they gave to my parents. Not only the upper part of this enormous garden, but also the whole house. In Brünn there was a big minority of German-spoken people. But this minority was divided into the Jewish and the non-Jewish. The Jewish, even if they were like my parents, not religious at all, somehow they had friends almost only with Jewish people. She was 25 when she had the house built. This is incredible, isn't it? And my father was, 7 years older, 32. She had gone to university in Vienna. She started to study economy. But then she stopped and she got married. But for her whole life she was reading a lot. She was very concerned about philosophy and art. I'm the daughter of Grete and Fritz Tugendhat. I didn't live in the Tugendhat house, but 3 of my sisters and brothers did. There was a nurse living in the house for the children, Irene Kalkofen. And she is the only person still alive who lived in the house as a grown-up. She lives in London.
Only once I remember when people passed there, they asked, is this a fire engine station?
I don't really know whether there was any limit, but more or less there was none. That's why the house, you know, he really could build his ideal house. Heidegger says, the artist is just like a tool to show truth. And Mies says very similar things, timeless truths which can be shown in art. So they somehow had the same ideas about very important things.
Building began on the house in June of 1929. Interior work on the house started in spring of 1930. The house was finished, and the family moved in December 1930.
It was just built while I was in Berlin. I came back, and the house, of course, they had just moved in, I think, 3 weeks or so. And it was fantastic. I felt so happy there, and I loved the style altogether.
The curving travertine stairway leads down to the main level of the house, into one huge room containing a reception area, sitting area, dining area, study, and library, all within a single space of over 3,000 square feet. A glassed-in conservatory or winter garden extends the space. Floor-to-ceiling glass window panes, 10 feet high, run 75 feet across the length of the great space and almost 50 feet along the width. 2 of the glass window panes, each 16 feet wide, can be lowered mechanically into the floor below, opening the space to the outdoors. The sitting and study areas are separated by a slender, 20-foot wide, non-bearing wall of onyx, a semi-precious stone from North Africa. The interior of the house is supported by cruciform-shaped steel columns wrapped with highly polished, chrome-plated sheathing. The dining area is defined by a semicircular wood wall covered with ebony veneer, with a round dining table that originally could be expanded from seating 4 to as many as 24. A glass door from the dining area leads to a dining terrace and a travertine stairway down to the garden. The main level of the house also contains a kitchen and food service areas, pantries, utility rooms, staff quarters, and bathrooms.
This wall was of onyx, and especially when the sun was shining on it, the sun came from and behind it. Oh, it was so beautiful.
After the house was built, there was a discussion in the journal Die Form, which was a journal of the Werkbund, whether the Tugendhat is habitable or not. And Justus Bier, a critic of architecture, he said one can't live in the Tugendhat house.
He was an architectural historian living in Germany at the time, and incidentally an admirer of Mies, but he felt that there was something of a showcase, that it did not have the intimacy and the domesticity that one associates with a house.
He wrote about the Tugendhat house. It's a wonderful building. It would make a marvelous museum, but it's not a house that anybody can live in. So that's his opinion, based, of course, on looking at those photographs.
When you see the official photos made by De Sandalo, it gives you a very abstract picture about the house. This is, of course, a general problem of architecture photography, that always the photographs are made just after the house is built. The photos made by my father somehow give a different perspective on the house and show how the family lived in the house, which for me is very important. The children lived on the terrace. It's a very big terrace. They had a sandbox, and they had bicycles and cars, and they were, you know, it was fantastic for them. And they were all the time, they were outside, all the time. The garden between the house of my parents and the house of my grandparents is really like a park. It is enormous. So they could, you know, really do a lot of things there.
There's a number of the most important designs which have gone on to there, that we still see them around, were designed for the Tugendhats. The great X table, the Tugendhat chair, the Brno chair, Parsons table. These things were all done for them, and they have become classics ever since. I mean, 3/4 of a century afterwards.
I mean, can you imagine the same house with antiques? It would just not ever have had the impact it did at the time. It's this total harmonious integration of the flowing space, the lines of the house with the lines of the furniture that make it so great.
Downstairs they had a big piano, yeah, this big thing there. But upstairs it was not for Mies van der Rohe. He would never have approved it. He might have designed maybe another one, I don't know. And then Mies was supposed to come once. He must not see that because he will be offended. But luckily he called off his visit.
Mies and Lilly Reich were concerned about absolute perfection in every detail. It was impossible, you know, to just buy a carpet or it was so, and that's what I mean with this kind of perfection, which I think is so important in this whole work.
Lilly Reich was a colleague of Mies's in Germany. She taught at the Bauhaus, and they worked together on exhibitions. She was involved with the furniture, design, and fabrics.
I have part of the furniture. The furniture is now at the exhibit in Berlin. It was in Vienna and before in Munich. The furniture of Mies van der Rohe, as you know, is extremely simple. It is so simple, it's just nothing more or less, you know, with the table, for instance. But the message for me is perfection. Perfection in the material, in the surface, color, proportion. That things can be very simple, but somehow they have to be perfect. It is very seldom that an architect finds a client who really understands his architecture and who really completely identifies. And I think that this is a very important point in this house, and I think it's also one of the reasons why the house looks like this. This is hard to express, but I feel that this architecture is like part of my parents, how I knew and experienced them. And it is like it would be the architectural form of the spirit of my parents. Because for me they were like this architecture, very clear, very austere, and always this striving for truth and clarity.
Well, with that beautiful metaphor about the body and the building from Daniela Tugendhat, I'd like to introduce Daniela Hammer Tugendhat, the youngest daughter of the Tugendhat family, wife of Ivo Hammer, a professor emeritus of art history at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. Although she's unable to be with us visually, I have the pleasure of introducing Daniela.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted that this important event can take place. And I would like to thank Margaret and Dave Hensler for making this event possible, and Cynthia Vranas and her team who worked tirelessly to make it happen. I will not talk about the significance of Lilly Reich and her importance for the Tugendhat House. I leave this to the experts. But I would like to point to a more general issue. The invisibility of Lilly Reich's contribution to the Tugendhat House is by no means an individual problem between Mies van der Rohe and Lilly Reich. It is a structural problem of patriarchal gender inequality. Women were, and often still are, not meant to be artists, for sure not architects, this godlike profession of male ingenuity. Other great women architects of the 20th century shared the same fate. Think, for example, of Margarete Schütte-Lihotzky or Ellen Gray. Women painters of the last centuries, highly estimated in their own time, like Sofonisba Anguissola at the end of the 16th, or Artemisia Gentileschi or Judith Lester of the 17th century, have been wiped out of the cultural memory by art history. By centuries, we internalized these mental structures. So even now, in the 21st century, we find it hard to accept artistic equality between male and women artists. I do hope that after this little but important conference, nobody will speak of the Tugendhat House by Mies van der Rohe, but the Tugendhat House by Mies van der Rohe and Lilly Reich.
Thank you for encouraging a discussion about architectural collaboration, Lilly Reich, Mies, and the importance of interiors in architecture, Daniela, Ivo, and to all of our panelists tonight. A couple of other brief moments in our program. I'd like to introduce Prue Beidler. Prue has served on the Mies Society board for many years. Her father, I should say, Ambrose Madison Richardson, studied architecture with Mies at IIT, and Prue grew up hearing about this extraordinary man as a major influence on her father. This is what brings Prue to the Mies Society, and she's been working feverishly for us ever since. I'd like to introduce, with great honor, Prue Beidler.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm not sure I would say feverishly, but with incredible enthusiasm. And I think it was Barbie who reached out to me to ask me to join the Mies board. And I had really not had as much exposure, although I've lived in Chicago most of my adult life, I had not had as much exposure to IIT as I would have liked, although I certainly knew every time I went to a White Sox game and I would see the building the old building that my father worked in with Mies. And I remember as a child here, he would tell stories. I mean, there were quite a few stories about Mies, and certainly the suggestion that Dirk made earlier that English was not always easy for him was something my father would say as well. But an enormously important influence. The Mies Society, and I'm going to do a little pitch here. The Mies Society has done all sorts of wonderful things for IIT, and we would urge you, any of you who are interested, to get more engaged in a whole range of ways. And I think after what Dean Kroloff described tonight, as I wrote it down, extraordinary occasion, it's just been breathtaking. So, you know, and it's going to be hard to top this, but I'm sure that Cynthia and then the people she brings together will come up with something pretty wonderful pretty soon. And we do have a wonderful celebration, our annual celebration of the Mies birthday party, which will be coming up at the end of March. If you go to our website, which is miessociety.org, you can find out what's going on, and you can see, of course, beautiful pictures of Mies buildings. But I'd like to highlight for you a project that we're working on at the moment, and that is the renovation of the Crown Hall steps on the south side, which needs some work. As you know, buildings often need restoration, and even when they're beautifully, maybe even more when they're just exquisitely designed in the beginning, it's important to get it right. And we've spent a fair amount of time, actually, including those of us on the Mies Society board who are not architects at all, but adore that building. We've created a $250,000 fundraising project for the steps, and I am delighted to tell you, I think we're at $121,500 as of tonight. So if anybody wants to go to that site right away and get us halfway there, I would encourage you to do that. And you can also, so if you go to the miessociety.org website, you will also, so you go through the membership section. So you could become a member as well and get routine information about what we do. And on that membership section is the information about this project. So I would urge you to go. This is just a fantastic group, and I couldn't be prouder of what we've done tonight.
Thank you so very much, Prue, and for all that you do for the Mies Society. Now I'd like to just turn it back briefly to Reid Kroloff, our esteemed Dean of Architecture, and to say a couple of words and close the evening.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Prue, as well. And thank you to the entire Mies Society for what you do to help preserve Mies's legacy in the United States and on our campus specifically. And I'm delighted that we're halfway there on the fundraising campaign. It's just going to be terrific, and that work is going to not only sustain us in Crown Hall, Mies's Great American Masterpiece, along with Seagram's in New York, but also work at 3410 right across the courtyard, one of Mies's earlier buildings on campus, and equally important as part of our educational mission. So thank all of you for contributing and to the Mies Society for pushing that effort. And I just want to thank a few other people tonight. We've got lots of guests and visitors this evening, people from all around the world. We've got academics like Ivan Cabrera, who we met, and the dean also of the University of Notre Dame, Michael Lakutis, is with us this evening. We've got faculty from lots of other colleges, from not only colleges on the IIT campus, but colleges all around the city of Chicago and around the world. We've got a healthy representation from preservationists, modernist preservationists as well, which is important because modernism is now antique. As we know, it's all beyond 50 years, which is shocking. I'm talking to you from my office at 910 North Lakeshore Drive and was reading an ad this morning that referred to this as a historic building. And it just sort of made my skin crawl just a little bit, since it was built right around the time I was born. So also, I want to thank the many alumni who are with us this evening. We've got people we know here from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and aughts. Including one person I want to call up specifically, Scott Skipworth, who was a classmate of none other than Cynthia Bronis. So, I want to call out two of our great close friends who are with us this evening, the Chicago architect, preservationist, and all around supporter of our school, John Vinci, and of course, always Phyllis Lambert, who helped bring us Mies and some of his best work here in the US. So it's really a wonderful group of people. all of whom have come to listen to everybody who is on the screen right now. The entire grid of 20 people who made this evening possible and spoke to us, starting with Barbie and concluding with Prue and everybody in between. So thank you to the Henslers, and thank you especially to Cynthia Vranes Olsen, who put all of this together and has worked so hard to make it happen. This is the second big event this year. There's going to be more. The Mies Society is on an incredible roll. And I'm just delighted that, that we can all be the beneficiaries of that. So thank you all very much. Come back and see us again and have a great evening.